Hi folks, and welcome to McLeod Law's business series on entrepreneurship. Our guest is Scott Ruzesky, proprietor of Right Way Fencing. We'll talk a little bit about him and Right Way Fencing. In terms of the series, you'll find our series on our YouTube channel, links to it from our website, LinkedIn as well, and other social media sources. And Scott, hopefully we'll get this on your social media sources as well. So we're going to talk about a variety of things. We're going to talk about entrepreneurship, of course. We're going to talk about Scott's own personal view about what that means, what it takes, maybe even a little bit about what success looks like. And a favorite topic of mine is mentorship. Where do you find mentorship? Where do you find guidance? Not necessarily in your own family, but from other sources. So welcome, Scott, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So thought maybe we'd talk a little bit first about background. What can you tell us about yourself? Where are you from? Where are you raised? In fact, tell us a little bit about what role business played in your youth, if any.
Sure. So I was born in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and spent most of my growing up time here in Calgary. And then my family moved to Kelowna, British Columbia. I went through high school there and then through college there. And then I knew that the Okanagan Valley is, they call it the Sunshine Tax. It's a great place to live, but a hard place to make any money. And so I knew that I probably wanted to move away to try and have a better opportunity of getting myself and my family ahead. So I came back to Alberta in 1992 with a 10-year plan, which got stretched out to be a 20-plus year plan. And
you know, the purpose of this series on entrepreneurship is to allow our viewers a chance to sort of pick your brain in terms of how you got to what I know is your degree of success. You talked about a 10-year plan and it turned into a 20-year plan. You know, how vivid was the plan when it was a 10-year plan? How does that move around? What do you have to do to adapt? What changes it? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, the 10-year plan was that I would establish myself and my family through business here in Alberta and then be able to move back to Kelowna and do what I'm somewhat doing today. But that was with a different company, which is now a competitor, and that was with a different family background, which is now my ex-family. So through a divorce and an exiting of a family business, I had to have a restart at about the 7-year mark or 8-year mark. And so that was not part of my vision originally. And then having a couple of younger kids, I certainly wanted to be a big role in their lives, and I wasn't about to leave them. So
right.
My 10-year plan, I couldn't decide where my ex was going to locate. So being that we're both in Calgary at the time, I was committed to being here both for my kids, and it made the best sense for me to restart my business career.
It's amazing, you know, just in my practice, it's amazing how often people in business, especially smallish or mid-sized businesses, start somewhere and then end up going out on their own and kind of competing with their former business. And in one way or another, that's what's happened with you. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. How do you find that concept of sort of competing with the place that you used to be at?
I'm fine with it in the sense that I think there's enough marketplace that there's an ability for many people to make their livelihood in the same marketplace. I admire my competition, both my ex-company and any other competitors that we have. We always have to have competitors, so I think it's better to have like-minded competitors and level-headed competitors than to have people that maybe are challenging in the way in which they operate their businesses. Then you're very unpredictable. So
right.
I would
it's like the loose player at the poker table almost, right?
Correct, yeah. I'd rather have someone that is predictable and so.
Is it fair to say your business is primarily called Right Way Fencing? I know you have a variety of other operations and businesses as well. Tell me what Right Way Fencing does.
So Right Way Fencing is the main business that most people associate me with, and it's the first business, the main business that I run. Right Way Fencing is a large commercial, residential, chain link, and other forms of fencing contractor and manufacturer. So we've spread our locations right across Canada now, as far east now as Toronto, Niagara Falls, and as far west as Abbotsford, with I believe there's 13 different Right Way locations. But I also have other fencing companies that I own sometimes in the same market that we operate very independently.
Right.
I've also sort of vertically integrated with a powder coating business, which Right Way Fencing is a client of, and
So you're kind of doing business with yourself in some aspects.
to some degree, and then most recently I have a fittings manufacturing business, which is what took Right Way to the Niagara Falls area. So Fencast Industries in Niagara Falls, Ontario was
How do you spell that?
Fencast, Fencast. So Fencast was a supplier to the Right Way Fence Group, and when in tough times, it went into bankruptcy. And so that's part of the seeing entrepreneurial ideas is taking something that someone else failed at and turning it around. So originally started out buying some of the inventory with a partner and buying some of the equipment with no intentions of ever running the business out there, and evolved into buying the real estate and turning the business around and restarting the business from completely nothing.
Yeah.
And now I have my son involved in the business as a partner, who graduated from Edmonton at University of Alberta with a BCom. And when I got into that business, I had no intentions that my son would be involved in the business, and it just evolved from there.
You know, so man, there are about 12 questions I want to ask you. What's it like working with family? So much of what I see, frankly, in Alberta is family-related businesses. Sometimes friends, lots of times family.
Well, it certainly can have its challenges. I mean, it can make for an interesting dinner conversation around the dinner table. But in my case now, with my son being in the Niagara region and myself being in Calgary or Kelowna, there's enough distance where I think I'm more of a coach or a mentor to my son Ryan.
Right.
Previously, working in the previous business with family, there's definitely is challenges of family dynamics that you have to be concerned about. So I wouldn't say at this point in time in my life that I'm really working in a family business. I guess maybe now, most recently in the last couple of years, involving my son, back to a bit of a family business dynamic. But prior to that, it was in the last 20 years or 18 years have mostly just been myself and previous business partners. So.
You know, I almost don't even respond to this bit of a commercial, I guess. One of the things that I see so often with family businesses is that the glue is the blood or the family relationship. And there's a bit of a tendency to not paper up things as much as a more formal company might have done. And don't even respond to that because I don't know the situation. It's getting too personal. But I can certainly say that for family businesses, my advice always is do talk to a lawyer about papering things up a little bit anyway. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is a couple of things. One, how do you find these opportunities like Fencast? Without necessarily being overly specific, I don't want to put you in a compromising spot, but how do you find these opportunities? You trip across them, or you're looking for them, or what?
Well, I think finding the opportunities is having the vision. And part of being entrepreneurial, I think, is maybe something you can learn, but it's also kind of like your personality. It's something that you inherently have within yourself, and it's the ability to see what others can't see. And so a quick example would be our Penticton office. We used to have a customer that we supplied down there, went bankrupt, burned us for a little bit of cash. Certainly was upset about losing a bit of money, but more importantly, I wanted the phone number. So I really was trying to contact the previous owner, was to get the phone number, because he represented a certain volume and marketplace in that area, and I was interested in that volume and marketplace, and taking that over and running it as a successful business. So I did eventually get the phone number, and I got the phone number by calling TELUS and waiting a year and marking my calendar so that when that year was up and the number was free for anyone to acquire, I acquired it like that day or the next day. Started forwarding the calls to our Kelowna office, and it was so busy that we ended up establishing an office. So the vision is to be able to see something that others can't see, that maybe the customer bankrupted or did not pay their bill, and that's the end of what most people would see in it. Instead of that, I looked at the positive side of that and said, there's a marketplace here that's now being underserved, and I want to go serve it.
Well, it's interesting because part of what I'm hearing in answer to my question is, how do you find these opportunities? It includes always looking for opportunities. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, the growth of my business has really not been specifically planned, and it's mostly, again, by coming across opportunities or seeing opportunities and seizing that moment and moving on it.
It's fascinating to me personally that as a business lawyer, I see a certain layer of business, and yet, to be honest, there's a bunch of things about business that I don't understand. Like, when those opportunities come along, where do you get the capital?
Well, hopefully from within your business. Honestly, when I started out Right Way Fencing, I had a very small bit of money myself, and a partner at the time who I thought was able to inject a reasonable amount of capital, but really he could sign for some bank financing, and we were pretty paper thin, and it was certainly scary times originally. It's where you find capital is, and in my case, was just by being careful about every dollar you spent, every dollar that you put out on accounts receivable, and how you spent your money. So really stretching your early dollars and then reinvesting that money back into the business.
Yeah.
So the growth for other locations and so forth generally came from growing the business organically from within.
Right. And I guess when these opportunities come along, help me understand, how confident are you, how often the venture that you're taking is going to succeed?
Well, you're always flying by the seat of your pants. I mean,
Yeah.
if you know your core business, you should be able to succeed in any marketplace. If you know what you're doing and you know your business well, just opening it up in a different marketplace should only present challenges that you should be able to overcome by the location. But I have gone into completely other businesses and started, literally from scratch, and had no idea really of what the business was going to look like and what the success or failure of the business would be. But one of the things I've learned over the years is I just really don't take no for an answer. And you just keep going. And even if people tell you that it's not going to work or this doesn't fit, I just kind of don't listen to them and keep going until I've told myself no, it's going ahead.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. And, I know you have a lot of irons and a lot of fires now. How do you keep track of the Scott Ruzesky empire?
Well, one of the key people that I have in my business is my controller. So controller does a lot for keeping track of things and reporting back the financial status of the various organizations. And when I have a question, I certainly lean on my controller to provide me with information. And so that's really how I keep track of it. And
Right.
Other than that, honestly, most of it's up in my head.
Right. No, it's fascinating. One of the things when I asked you about what you thought entrepreneurship was, you talked about the ability to see what many others can't see, especially in terms of finding opportunities where others might not see them. And then you said a little while ago that maybe it's something that comes to you naturally, but also to a certain degree can be a learned skill. How do you learn how to find those opportunities?
I think you need to probably talk to someone who is really truly entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
To find out how they see things or how they've done things, and to pick up on what they've done that's been successful, and to weed through those things.
Right.
As far as the ability to see things, it's like anybody else. If you either see it or you don't see it.
Right.
Again, I think that's inherent in who you are, because there's definitely lots of times where nobody else will mention an idea or doesn't think the same way. I think it's maybe a way of thinking. And
Right.
I don't know that you can necessarily teach people always how to think.
Right. Yeah. Do you sleep?
Yeah, sure.
Solid 3 hours a night?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A few of my friends have joked about, when do I have time for something between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., but no, I sleep pretty good every night.
And this notion of seeing opportunities and taking advantage of them, are there some that you carry the idea for years and years and finally exploit, and are there some that you leave at first and then circle back to? How does that happen?
So at one point in time, and I'm going to probably just date it as like 2014, economy was quite good here in Alberta. A lot of things were happening, and I had a lot of opportunities. I had so many opportunities, and at the time I had a business partner. I had so many opportunities, I actually opened up a spreadsheet and I started to list down the opportunities. And then I also listed the capital, or the expected capital, of how much it would cost
Right.
to do each opportunity. I did that so I would somewhat keep track of them. but also so I could focus on what I needed to do or where I thought it would be best to go. And then I look back at that spreadsheet a couple years later, and there was 10 plus opportunities on there. I could share it with you sometime as a joke or out of fun. But I look back at that, and I think I crossed every single one of them off that list within about 3 years.
Right.
So it's not always planned, but sometimes certainly the capital involved will discipline you as to what you can and can't do, and you can't do everything all at once just because of the amount of time and energy and also the capital that it takes to do it. So.
Right. Look, I don't want to get overly specific, but talk about banking. Are you a big bank person, small bank, variety of banks, local banks?
Yeah. So I think as we talked quickly off camera, I mentioned that there's a few pillars that I think are important to running a business, and one of them is your banking, one of them is your accounting, and one of them is your legal or your law representation and firm. So we can talk about that one after, which I'm sure you'll love to talk about. But on the banking note, I bank personally with one bank, I bank corporately with another bank, but then I also bank with another bank for real estate. And so the variety of banking, I think, is to my advantage in the sense that they're all kind of competing for your time and attention and for your business.
They're aware of one another.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think I've been quite lucky to work with one banking institution in particular that's quite entrepreneurial, which allowed me to buy out my business partner about 5-6 years ago. And
Right.
that was based upon having a certain amount of real estate, was using it as the equity and the leverage to be able to do that share purchase buyout of my business.
I'm not going to name names, but I'm a business too, right? And my bank took away from me my personal banker a few years ago. I've found that a challenge, to be honest. So when you say this one particular bank is entrepreneurial, is that a personal thing, or is that the nature of the bank, or is that a team approach that they're taking?
They're taking a team approach. It's the nature of that particular bank's business. That's what they do.
Who found who? Did they find you, or did you find them?
It was an introduction through business, so I kind of found them, but they were already introduced to our business group at the time, so on a small scale, and I took it to a much bigger scale.
Right.
But on my day-to-day banking, back to what you said about the relationship managers changing, I've certainly had that happen a number of times, and
Right.
it's gone from good to bad to good. It's to the point where that relationship with the mainstream banks or your day-to-day banking is again very critical.
Sure.
And some people, especially in being a fencing contractor or a fencing business, we have a seasonal business, and especially in the early days when I was thin on capital, we went through a seasonal time, being now winter time, where we would lose money and then come back to making money in the spring, and the losses over the winter would probably scare most new bankers. So getting a banker to learn your business
Right.
was important, and for them to know that you were going to come up the next spring.
So you had to teach them a bit.
Absolutely, every time. And every time we get a new relationship manager, you have to kind of go through that learning process of your business cycle. And so I prefer not to be changing relationships as often as the banks like to.
Yeah. I feel the same way, honestly, and maybe someday I'll bring a banker in here to defend themselves and tell us why they're doing things the way they're doing it now. It could be just bottom line, I don't know.
I think it's a security thing so that bankers don't get too close to their clients.
Too cozy, yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you a question that we sort of didn't talk about off camera, and at this moment I'm still the chair of the Chamber of Commerce, and a word that I've heard a lot over the last couple of years is innovation, to the point where sometimes I wonder if it's just a word that's being used a little bit too freely. But is that a word that's operative in your business?
Well, I think innovation is for sure always part of any business, especially any business that's trying to move forward or get themselves ahead of their competition. So I'm big on tech and technology, and anything we can do to simplify and better or speed up our processes, I'm always interested in doing. So, a quick example would be just our payroll system. We have employees that fob in, fob out, and can check in or check out on a telephone, and has automated the payroll process to where in the past my accounting team called it payroll week. Now it's payroll day.
Right.
So and that's something that we do every 2 weeks, for the rest of the life of the business. So it's important to try and streamline that process.
Right.
In our business, we have a safety program where constantly things are being updated, and lots of paper needs to come back from the field for a field hazard assessment or a field report. So we've gone to iPads and to doing everything digitally. And so by doing that, the paperwork gets back automatically via the cloud to the office, so we don't have to go and chase 20 crews to collect paperwork. And the process is a lot more professional. So when we've had audits for our safety program, it's all very documented, all very there. The auditor comes in and looks at it and says, that's impressive, because
Right.
I don't have to go searching for things. It's all right here.
One of the things that strikes me that must be really challenging, it's really neat to be a business lawyer and watching all these businesses succeed, when I often think personally, I don't think I would, to be honest. I'd be maybe too conservative and stuff like that. Innovation almost always means new idea or doing something in a new way. Could be a system, could be a product, but there's new ideas all over the place. How do you know whether to bet on a new idea like that? How do you know to bet on the payroll system that you're talking about, or the safety system that you're talking about?
That's where I do a lot of research.
Yeah.
Myself, and ask questions.
You are a research guy.
Observe and try and do that planning and researching before I go and implement.
Yeah.
So I'm slow to implement. I mean, in my office would certainly say that there's some things that we do that are very archaic, and yes, I know they need to be advanced, and we need to improve upon some processes, but until I see a better way,
Right.
if someone shows me a better way, I'm not really interested in changing what already works.
On a slightly more personal basis, I'm kind of interested in the Scott Ruzesky sense of success. I'm curious whether your own sense of self is that you'll always be chasing the next opportunity, and maybe you'll never personally feel like you're slamming the football in the metaphysical end zone, or talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think there's definitely different ways that you can measure success, and I have a brother and a sister, and I consider all three of us successful, and I consider us successful in different areas of life.
Right.
My brother and sister both are university graduates. I'm a college graduate, so
Right.
they got something that I didn't get. Financially, yeah, I'm ahead of them.
Mm-hmm.
But personally, my brother and I have both on to second relationships and marriages, and my sister is on her first. So she's successful in one way, and my brother's successful in another way, and I'm successful in another way.
Right.
So I don't think you should ever measure success
By someone else's.
strictly by your bank book,
Yeah.
or how many cars you have, or how many, what you have personally. I don't think that is a measure of success. I think you're successful when you're a well-rounded person and you've checked a lot of boxes off.
Right.
Certainly most people, especially if you're talking about business and everything else, they will look at you as being successful if you run a business and you've made a good income at it and checked certainly financial boxes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're successful.
Right. So just before we wrap up talking primarily about entrepreneurship, there's a few things I want to dwell on with you, Scott. And one of them, these questions I haven't spoken to you about, so God bless you for listening to them and fielding them. You've always struck me as a person that just has to know. I notice lots of times, even when you and I are just kibitzing about things, you do the research right in front of me. Is that you, or are there sometimes that you actually just follow your nose without researching it to the greatest detail?
No, I think as a kid I was always very inquisitive. I mean, I was sometimes called 20 questions or grilling people. And when I'm grilling people, I certainly don't mean to make them uncomfortable. I'm just trying to, like you say, satisfy my own knowledge and get down to the answer,
Right.
and to the question that I have in my mind at the time. So.
Well, but because I ask about it, because I'm curious what role you say that plays in being a successful entrepreneur.
I think obviously you want to be informed, and you definitely need to do your research to be able to find out the answers to questions that you have.
Right.
But I'm not sure exactly what importance that has.
Yeah, it gives you your own sense of self-comfort. Fair?
Yeah, fair.
But then the segue I want to make is we talked about banking a little bit, and part of knowing your banker is having sort of a degree of mutual trust. You talked about some of the other pillars being accounting and legal, and talk about trust or personality of your support in accounting and legal, as opposed to, them just handing you research or spreadsheets.
So during my college, I did a degree in business administration, and my major was in accounting. So I have an accounting background, and I followed that through to the start of a CMA program, to the point where when I didn't find it to be really practical and day-to-day, I, at that point in time, figured I was never going to go into public practice, and so I'd had enough. But I remember my first accounting book, and the title of the accounting book in Accounting 101 was The Basis for Business. And I remember the title on that textbook, and I really do believe that the basis for your business is knowing accounting. So I would highly recommend anybody that's thinking of going into business that they should study at least an introductory accounting class, so they can understand their way around a balance sheet,
Right.
and around an income statement, and really how the cash flow and how a business goes. It may sound a little bit boring, but I find it quite interesting, and I think that in your relationship with your bankers, in particular, is tied in more closely with your accounting. So if you know your accounting, your banker knows that you know your accounting.
Right.
I think that certainly gives them a degree of confidence in you and know what you're doing as far as your numbers are.
One of the things that I learned 15 years ago or so when I really started focusing on business law is about reading financial statements, and I'm sure I would only get a B- at it now. There's a lot of stuff hidden in those financial statements if you don't know what you're looking for, right? There's the footnotes, the importance of footnotes and stuff like that. I still rely pretty heavily on accounting advisors in a lot of my cases. What about legal? What are you looking for there in terms of a personality?
In legal, well, certainly somebody that you can get along with, and somebody that understands your vision or understands what your important points are and what your non-important points are. In legal, as I deal with McLeod Law, I deal with a number of the lawyers here, because they're specialists in different areas. So having the right specialist in each area, I know that I would call, maybe yourself for one aspect, or somebody else for another aspect, and I think that them understanding who you are and how you do business is important, but them having the background for what that area of expertise in law is probably more important.
Right. One of the things that I felt I came across was, as a young lawyer, it was really, really easy to come up with a bunch of reasons for your client about why they couldn't do something. You can't do it for this reason, you can't do it for that. And after a while you mature and start to figure out, again, that there are legally creative ways to get to yes. And that's important for business, isn't it?
Yes, and I would probably go on to say that you don't want to necessarily get bogged down in the legal work. So at times when I've been buying out other businesses, that time is of the essence.
Right.
And if you want to get deal to a legal document or to a legal understanding, but you don't want to get buried in and maybe kill the deal because you got too involved in checking maybe encumbrances on assets or something like that. So the style of how you do business needs to be understood by your legal team for sure.
One of the things I want to ask you about right out of left field is there, in your view, a distinct Alberta perspective on business? Sometimes what I hear called the Alberta vibe, as opposed to BC, or it depends, or it's hit and miss. Has it changed? What's your sense of all of that?
Well, I've done business in several provinces in Canada and in the United States. So I don't know that I find necessarily business in Canada to be strategically different from province to province. They certainly have their nuances and their forms and the way in which they operate, but for the most part, I think they operate on a fairly standard way.
Now you're going to talk about the States.
The States is quite different. So you want to be careful in the States doing business down there because they're very much more litigious, and you want to watch your exposures down there.
Incredible. I once had a case out of Atlanta, Georgia, and the person giving me instructions was an in-house lawyer, and she asked me to write a demand letter to someone for money that they owed, a business that owed money to another business. And I wrote a very typical Canadian law firm letter, and she said, "Are you personally that polite, or Canadians that polite?" You know, and I said, "Canadians are generally this polite." Actually, I called it a rip snorter. You know, I know a lot of American lawyers, and it's a different game down there, very aggressive. So I think we're going to wrap up here on talking generally about entrepreneurship and Scott's sense of that, and I want to segue in our next episode into mentorship and teaching. So thanks, Scott.
Thank you.